The reasons for our popularity. I think that's impossible to answer. Really impossible. Nobody really knows what the reasons are.
The Bee Gees. They're more than a flourish of falsettos. They're not just teeth, tams and tight trousers.
Why is it, do you think, that millions of people love your music?
'Cause we're living in a world of fools.
There's so much more to the Bee Gees than Saturday Night Fever and office parties.
That looks gay.
You put them on in a party and everyone's dancing, doesn't matter how old they are.
And it's me you need to show. How deep is your love?
Look beyond the white suits and satin. The Bee Gees are pop royalty.
I think the Bee Gees should be revered in the way that the Beatles are revered, and they're not.
Back in the 60s, they were pop balladeers. The Bee Gees were heartbreakers.
Those are some of the most moving, touching lyrics I think ever put to paper.
These were geniuses at communicating emotion in different ways across different decades to different generations.
The brothers Gibb. They were all graft and craft, but when they united in song and harmony, the Bee Gees were pure class.
Creating these melodies like spun gold out of the thin air, how they do it is extraordinary.
From pop to soul to disco, we walk the line between the naffness, the genius, and yes, the joy of the Bee Gees.
Some of our songs I never really want to listen to. And some songs I think, oh, boy, that was a good record, you know? How did that happen?
In the 50s, variety was king, with shows for all the family, complete with impersonators, dancing girls, and ventriloquists.
Just look at this face, eh? A mean, melancholic misfit.
And this hotbed of talent is where the brothers Gibb cut their milk teeth.
There is a side of the Bee Gees music that, you know, sort of you could say was destined for cabaret from the start.
You could laugh at the fact they were performing in little suits when they were young kids, but they were in show business right from the beginning, and show business meant the whole business of show.
From an early age, music was in their blood, and their dad, Hugh, a band leader on the Mecca club circuit, was their mentor.
Dad used to play the Russell Street Club in Manchester, and he told everybody at this club that these three kids were singing and harmonizing, and they said, well, you know, bring them along to the club. As long as you're with them, they'll be okay. They're underage, but bring them anyway. And we were three kids, you know, never work with kids and dogs. They'll steal everything.
Come over to the sunny side now. Australia, a great place for families. Opportunity for you, fine for your wife, great for your children.
Here comes summer. School is out.
The Gibb family took up the offer to become 10-pound Poms, and their trip to Oz would inform their songwriting for years to come.
We went on this beautiful white ship called the Fair Sea. We saw things like Egypt and India and the Suez Canal and Sri Lanka. That's incredible for kids to experience that. And I've always felt that was really what kick-started the creativity, you know, seeing these different cultures and at such a young age. The adventure had begun.
Let the sun shine bright on my happy summer home.
Encouraged by their dad, the brothers formed a band and toured Queensland's holiday resorts and dives.
Come on in here, it's the best band in the land.
We did the Sandgate Hotel, and it was a galvanized roof, and the water was pouring in onto the stage, like not just raining, pouring in. And we had to stand there with water pouring, with this, like, soaking and singing, and people sitting in front of us fighting, not standing, but punching each other sitting down.
until the young brothers caught the eye of TV producers.
Here are some of the boys I'm looking for. The Bee Gees. Barry A., the leader of the group, come here. Barry Gibb and your young brothers. Now, come on, who are you? Which is which? You're twins, eh?
I'm Robin.
Robin?
Morris.
And Morris.
Barry was tall, good-looking lad, you know, and then there was Robin and Morris, who were these short little dudes, you know, and they played a guitar and they had all little high voices. They were looked upon as more of a novelty act, you know, and people realised their talent, but they just weren't taken all that seriously.
Growing up down under, their songs took inspiration from old school America.
Bye-bye, love. Bye-bye, happiness.
With their clean-cut looks and harmonies, they harked back to the 50s.
Wine and women and song will only make me sad. Love and kisses and hearts, the thing I never had.
Until they were inspired by only the biggest band in the world.
What a day it was at Adelaide Airport. Arriving to meet the citizens were John Lennon, two other Beatle regulars, and Jimmy Nicol.
I see it must be ashtray out here.
Oh, what do you expect to find here in Australia?
Australians.
The feeling, the actual vibration that was going on in the culture, it changed everybody. You know, it changed hair, it changed clothes, everything changed. And no one knew why, but they all had to follow this thing.
Where is the sun that shone on my head?
Spicks and Specks was the first record. It went to #1 in Perth. And we thought, something's happening. Something's happening.
All of my life I saw is the bed, the spicks and the specks. All my life gone away.
By 1967, they had released 11 singles in Australia, but for the Bee Gees, London was calling.
We had to get to England. We had to be a part of it. And I remember my father and I was having a really big argument with the executives at Festival Records because we didn't want to stay. We had to make it internationally one way or another. We knew that in some way that was our destiny.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields.
When we arrived in England was the week of release of Strawberry Fields. And that was a shock to the system, everybody's system, you know, and Penny Lane. And that was the drive. Oh God, you know, they've raised the bar again. You know, how do these guys do this, you know? And everybody's got to aspire to that now.
Penny Lane, there is a barber showing photographs.
Ever ambitious, the Bee Gees went straight to the top.
Epstein, of course, at the time, was ruling the roost, you know, as far as all the bands were, the pop bands were concerned. And the Bee Gees were trying to make their way, and so was Robert.
Epstein passed them on to his Aussie business partner, impresario Robert Stigwood.
He heard them singing on the steps outside his office and thought he'd found the new Beatles. And of course, people probably laughed, as they do.
There we were, going to NEMS, being signed to NEMS, being signed to the Beatles organisation, and being in those offices while the Beatles, one or the other, would walk through. It was just incredible.
The Bee Gees are one of those bands that could, without Robert Stigwood, could have easily never been anything. In anybody else's hands, you may never have heard of them again.
In 1967, the Beatles were it, and the charts were full of male beat groups.
No milk today, it wasn't always so. The company was gay.
With the Fab Four as his template, Stigwood wanted a four-piece band, so he roped in another Aussie with boyish good looks, Colin Peterson. But the brothers Gibb didn't stop at four.
Morris owed me $25. So he said, but no, we haven't got any money either, mate. We just arrived with skin as well, you know. We've just been signed up by this guy called Robert Stigwood. And so why don't you come and play guitar? I was really not wanted. It was only Barry that said to Robert, we want Vince to be you know, a full member of the band, and I became a Bee Gee.
With all 5 Bee Gees in place, the boys now had to deliver the hits.
That was the highest point of pressure in our lives, was how do we have a hit in England? How do we do that?
And their first single chose an unlikely inspiration.
Just after 9 o'clock this morning, as prayers were ending at Panglas Junior and Infant School, this mountain of cold slag, half a mile high, began to slide towards the little town of Aberfan.
We went out and sat on the stairs where the elevator was, and the power went off. And so in the dark, we sort of proceeded down that path. The idea that you could be in a mine and that you could be isolated and not know what's going on outside.
In the event of something happening to me, there is something I would like you all to see. It's just a photograph of someone that I knew. Have you seen my wife, Mr. Jones?
With their eyes on the US, Stigwood and the record company changed Have You Seen My Wife, Mr. Jones to New York mining disaster.
At the time, I think they were different. I think, you know, what's he singing about? New York mining disaster? It's a strange subject for a song. The whole content of those lyrics are quite unusual.
That's one of the main songs that will bring tears to my eyes. Their songwriting is absolutely from the heart. It's wide open and exposed, and that's exactly why I love them. That's brave beyond belief.
Or have they given up and all gone home to bed, thinking those who once existed must be dead? Have you seen my wife, Mr. Jones?
They proved they were original songwriters, but it didn't hurt to sound like the Beatles.
When New York mining disaster came out in America, a lot of people thought it was the Beatles.
I think they're always seen as arrivistes as well, the Bee Gees. You know, they're kind of people that are doing something that people view as sort of ersatz. Barry is a great sort of pastiche of John Lennon's songwriting style. It makes me think of Oasis, because they're trying to do something similar, you know, they're sort of copying the sort of the kind of way that Lennon writes songs. But he does it incredibly well.
New York mining disaster and the Bee Gees didn't quite chime with the Summer of Love. So the brothers sought solace in soul.
Robin's favourite artist and my favourite artist was Otis Redding. It was never outside of our system. It was always something we loved anyway. You know, Sam and Dave, Stax was very deep inside us. We weren't getting the opportunity to bring those things out because of the whole psychedelic syndrome and the idea that we had to do what everyone else was doing, which was to be something like the Beatles, you know. That was the way out for us, to be influenced by American music. We sort of found something, and that was the idea of the emotional ballad. The idea of that was really working for us.
To love somebody the way I love you.
This emotional ballad was originally intended for Otis Redding.
They were approaching it thinking of a soul artist, but there's something about the Bee Gees' delivery which accesses that emotion, but not the way a soul artist would do that.
I'm a man. Can't you see what I am?
For example, Otis' approach to soul, it's very much a punch in the face. This is soul. Feel my experience. Feel my emotional angst. Join me in this journey. Whereas the Bee Gees is much more a tickle. I'm in pain. Feel my pain. Join me in this suffering. And it creeps up on you. And then it grabs you.
somebody the way I love you.
So songs of experience, you know, the kids writing these sort of songs that sound like they were written by, you know, sort of middle-aged men. It's this sort of, that's quite odd.
So while the hip kids were being far out, the nation was listening to the Bee Gees, and by September 1967, they hit the top of the charts.
It was really an anti-Flower Power song. You know, it was sort of us playing with the idea.
Tonight, Massachusetts from the Bee Gees.
Suddenly we were on top of the pops, and Massachusetts was #1.
And the lights all went down in Massachusetts the day I left her standing on her own.
The Bee Gees' dream was to make it internationally, and their American soul influences and gift for balladry helped propel them stateside.
And this is the first time they've appeared on television in the United States. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm hand. Very talented group of men, the Bee Gees.
Smile, an everlasting smile. A smile can bring you near to me. Don't ever let me find you gone, 'cause that would bring a tear to me.
The songs are very comforting. They're very comforting melodies. And then it does the same shape again, but it finishes it differently. So the harmonies are always moving and the melody is always moving, even though it's incredibly simple. But you're not bored by the simplicity because it's always changing.
It's only words, and words are all I have to take your heart away.
It's the difference between that addictive quality within a melody and monotony. And they cut it just right, where you're just on the edge of, oh, I need a bit more of this. And before you can consider whether or not you've heard it too often, you're on the edge of wanting a bit more.
And words are all I have to take your heart away.
The Bee Gees' ballads were emotional epics, and while Barry made hearts flutter, Robin made the earth tremble.
I really, really love Robin Gibb's voice. I think it's sensational. One of the all-time greats.
I started a joke which started the whole world crying.
That heart and soul sliced open and rendered to a public. It's like literally liver in a frying pan, isn't it? Delicious.
Oh no. I started to cry, which started the whole world laughing.
He sounds like he's about to cry. He sounds like he's about to burst into tears at any moment. His mother said that whenever Robin sang, it made me feel cold. You know, I think that's meant as a compliment.
I looked at the skies, running my hands over my eyes, and I fell out of bed, hurting my head from things that I'd said.
He had this incredible, almost operatic type of voice, and it was unique for him, and so he loved the really unhappy songs because it lent itself to his way of singing.
This very high voice with the vibrato, which nobody else was doing then.
And when the voices of Robin, Barry and Morris came together, it was a magical blend.
What is unique about their vocal harmony? It's something that only the Bee Gees, the Beach Boys, Everly Brothers, sibling harmonies. It's a very unique sound, and it's almost impossible for any other act to achieve that sound.
I just gotta get a message to you.
You'd hear them in the studio and you take out the track on playback and you just hear those vocals. I mean, they would find something wrong with it and do it again, but it was heavenly to me.
There's something so gorgeous to me about families singing together. Their voices sound so rich and full and beautiful, and their ballads were such a great showcase for their songwriting and for their vocals.
I told him I'm in no hurry.
The brothers' voices may have mixed well, but the internal power struggles were less harmonious. Both Barry and Robin wanted to sing lead.
Whilst on the plus side, they have the sibling voices, sibling rivalry. That must be very difficult to deal with.
It's a very complex dynamic, being in a family, let alone trying to create with your siblings, and then have an elder sibling, which at some point would have been dictating the rules. Most of us would grow up and move out the house. They were stitched together at the hip because this was their business, whilst aching for a distance, a gap, breathing space between each of them. They managed to translate that into a creative output, which is fragile. If they get it wrong, it breaks.
But for the moment, the brothers stayed united, and they were unaware just how big the band had become in Europe.
The Bee Gees, the most exciting sound in the world.
It was the first time we'd ever seen 20,000 kids in one place. I remember that car got crushed. We were lying on our backs pushing the roof up. So it was, you know, pretty hairy. But all we could think was, wow, just like the Beatles.
The desire to top the Beatles spurred them on, and the band's 1968 tour featured a 16-piece orchestra.
They could show to the audience that they could do live what they could do on record. And believe me, they did do it live. It was as good, every bit as good as the actual record.
First time we played with them on a tour, which was 68 in Germany, I was fascinated by the way the orchestra worked on the stage. So I think I watched them every night. It was a bit of an introduction for me to that kind of performance. In fact, it inspired me to have a go at that myself a year later.
The Bee Gees had hit upon a winning formula, but their albums proved they were unafraid to experiment in the studio.
The first few albums are filled with these songs that it's just, I don't know where this is coming from. They're just really weird, inexplicable songs. They're the product of very unique imaginations.
They came right out of left field. Colin and I didn't know where they came from. They were writing at incredible pace. I mean, it was just flowing out of them, you know, because things were going well.
If one of us had an idea, we would all jump in and stretch that out and make that work.
And the guys used to just come up with songs like pick them out of the air.
It was a sense that we psychically knew where each other was going because we knew each other. And the greatest thing about songwriters and why they don't last is because you have to be in the same zone. Nobody has the relationship or has had the relationship the three brothers had.
A few years back, I had a boring period doing not much, but I decided to write out their lyrics. And I was really kind of enamoured by it. I thought there's actual poetry in this. The amount of work that went into the placing of the words, and they're not unnecessary words. It's not done just for vocal harmony or technique.
Fairy stories in the penny arcade. You bought my love and I paid. I'm now trying to make history. You could have been good to me.
It's very difficult to kind of pigeonhole them. They're sort of psychedelic, but they're sort of not. They're sort of middle of the road, but they're sort of not. They've just got a complete niche of their own.
My man. I'm going to join the Air Force today.
The band had their unconventional moments in the studio, while their image was also different.
It was a very curious band, wasn't it? I mean, you've got the Mr. Handsome in the middle, you know, with his absolute beautifully placed teeth.
Barry had the pin-up looks. It was Barry. It was always Barry.
Morris at one side, an aimless, pleasant chap of, you know, no note.
Morris didn't look very comfortable standing, doing synchronised movements with the rest of them. He always looked much more comfortable with a guitar.
And then you've got Robin on the other side with horses gnashers, right? Worst hairdo in the world, you know, but incredible depth of character and soul.
The brothers were pop stars, and their lives became showbiz events. But the child stars were ill-prepared for the trappings of success and discovered that fame had a price.
We wanted to be famous, but we didn't know what came with that. We never got into heavy drugs. It was either grass, for Morris it was drink, and maybe to some extent for all of us it was amphetamines.
In this whirlwind, the Bee Gees decided to embark on the recording of Odessa, their take on the concept album.
As we get towards the end of the 60s, other bands start to have an influence on the charts, and most notably Pink Floyd now. And the early Pink Floyd was very, very experimental. Odessa, I would say, is probably their nod to a psychedelic Pink Floyd, just a nod in the right direction, because they weren't a psychedelic band.
Who is the girl with the crying face, looking at millions of signs?
Fame, ego and excess were now getting to the band, and the Bee Gees seemed to be losing direction.
Odessa is a very difficult record to pigeonhole. It opens with the title track, it's written by Robin, and it's just insane.
It was starting to crumble, you know. There was, unfortunately, it was so sad. This beautiful thing was falling apart.
Stigwood made a fateful decision on the next single and chose Barry's song as the A-side, leaving Robin on the flip side, which was to tear the band apart.
When I was small and Christmas trees were tall, we used to laugh while others used to play.
I didn't make the choices about what the A-side or B-side were. I used to hear these things third hand, second hand. What's going on, you know? And that's what led to the split, is that there's really the obsession with Rob to be an individual.
I sensed that it was all over, and I said to Colin, I told Colin Peters, I said, mate, it's time to bail out, you know? And Colin said, no, it's fine, it's all great. I said, well, see you later. Not long after that, Robin bailed, then Colin bailed, and then it was Barry and Morris.
I figured at that point it was over, you know. As brothers and friends, it just was no longer happening.
Odessa was released in 1969 while the Bee Gees splintered in public.
Every single word has been spoken. It's much too late to change the way.
There was a lot of music papers who always wanted you to say something. And as it turned out, they were setting Robin against me and me against Robin. And these are things we'd never experienced in our lives, you know. I mean, you said things, but those things didn't have any meaning. You just said them because you wanted to see your name in the paper, you know. If that's ego, yeah. And we were all doing that. That was not a good time. And so we separated for like 15 months.
In 1970, Stigwood made amends and reunited the brothers, this time as a trio. The songwriting magic was still there.
Robin and Barry, who are the two that have always historically have the problem with each other, meet and sit down there, how can you mend a broken heart?
I could never see tomorrow, but I was never told about the sorrows. Can you mend the broken hearts? How can you stop the rain from falling down? How can you stop the sun from shining? What makes the world go round?
Emotional content is not about relationships external to the group. It is actually about these three men that were boys and their existence together.
And how can you mend this broken man? How can a loser ever win? Please help me mend my broken heart and let me live again.
But the comeback was short-lived, because in the early 70s it was less about ballads. Music now looked and sounded different. And for the Bee Gees, the hits dried up.
By 1972, we were literally out the door. You know, nobody was really interested. And that's something that hits you very hard. You know, wow, no one's interested. Nobody wants to play our records. What do we do?
They'd gone from stardom to supper clubs, but for the Bee Gees, this was a variety homecoming of sorts.
Northern English clubs, chicken in the basket, everybody drunk, pretty much like early Australian audiences. We didn't feel like we were out of sort. We were quite happy. Okay, we'll do this, make a bit of money and put some food on the table.
But Stigwood still believed in the brothers, and he saw their future in soul. Who better to take them there than Aretha Franklin's producer, Arif Mardin?
What Arif brought to them was another approach to this emotional content. This is soul from an American perspective.
We left the maudlin stuff, we left the romantic heavy stuff behind, and we sort of locked into what was happening with the Delphonics and the falsetto singers, and we started to fall in love with that.
This is the American thing, this is the black thing. We've got this male falsetto singing a ballad, and he's not a eunuch. This is a regular guy, albeit in tight trousers, delivering a song which is emotional. It's an accepted format, not amongst white bands. This is an American gospel/soul thing. But Barry's discovered he has this capacity.
Barry discovered his falsetto, and he started writing for that kind of, for that genre.
I thought, okay, I don't mind making a fool of myself. So I went out and did that, and everyone went, oh, my goodness.
That opened up the Pandora's box, because suddenly there was a sound on there that was magnificent.
It wasn't an attempt to deliver American black music. It was an attempt to be, I think, to be comfortable within this new space. Moving to America was all part of that narrative. Absorb your surroundings, absorb the culture, absorbed the sounds.
Arif helped them define the elements of the new Bee Gees sound. During this time in the studio, Barry not only discovered his falsetto, but in 1975 the Bee Gees locked into their groove.
When you looked at the charts at that time, we think, well, what are people really going for? And people wanted to dance.
There's this story that's told, they're driving on the railroad track. There's some sort of legal requirement that every time one of the Bee Gees was interviewed, they would mention the driving over.
It would go click to click to click, 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 and then it would stop. And every night we'd go over this and it just started to stick in my head. That became the intro to Jive Talking.
I love that little keyboard riff and the do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Little hand clappings. Can't get, doesn't get better than that to me.
That was the real breakthrough, Jive Talking. We put it out on RSO without the name of the Bee Gees on it, because by then their stock had fallen so low with radio stations in America. They weren't playing Bee Gees records because of the two previous sort of flop albums. And within hours of the record landing at all the radio stations, they were calling in saying, "Who is this? This is amazing."
The Bee Gees were back. They united in image and song and self-produced their next album, Children of the World. Meanwhile, in New York, the underground sound of the dance floor that was to become key to the Bee Gees' rebirth was seeping into the mainstream.
Disco used to be the black, Hispanic and gay subculture, dancing at night to be able to cope with the daytime in a bankrupt and decaying New York.
One of the things that makes disco music, a lot of disco, incredible, is there is a sort of ineffable sense of melancholy at the centre of it. Obviously the Bee Gees were perfect at that. They were big on sort of melancholy ballads. There's something, just that sort of ineffable sense of melancholy. They get it perfectly.
You Should Be Dancing is the first point at which they start to discover the full-on disco sound. They started to do a songwriting session of which that would form the basis of what became the Saturday Night Fever project.
Mine was the little repeat echo. Why'd you do that on your back?
One of my best friends, Nick Cohn, wrote this article for New York Magazine about what he called the return of Saturday night, which was back to the 50s sort of thing, of doing your hair and getting all dressed up and going one night and blowing it all on the dance floor. Stigwood saw the article. He promptly optioned it for a movie. So then the whole idea was that we need a soundtrack. And of course the Bee Gees, since they were cresting a wave, not really, they weren't known as disco, they were just really having a lot of hits.
3 titles came into my head at that period, and one was Staying Alive, the other was More Than a Woman, and Night Fever. And Robert Stigwood called up and said, "Have you got any ideas for the title of the film?" So I said, well, strangely enough, I've got a title called Night Fever. And Robert Stigwood said, well, yeah, that's okay. He said, but it sounds a bit pornographic. So.
It around and we came up with this. We recorded the song and it was Night Fever.
Re-imaged, the brothers united as a trio with hair primped and shirts undone, while Barry stepped forward as the frontman. The sound was quite black. The clothes were often white.
When we look at how the Bee Gees were represented, this was a new unit, and suddenly we have a band where they all look the same. We have a band that look like something that comes out of the Bronx. Something that is a combination of influences that might hark back to the film Superfly. And in Superfly, there's a key character, Ron O'Neill. This is someone from the hood. This is a criminal, and there's a certain amount of street cred that goes with this image, which is Black America in the 70s.
If you put it in context of the time, in the 70s we'd got the Professionals and we'd got Sweeney rushing around, bashing people up.
You pillar! One more word from you and I'll nick you.
And then you've got these beautiful men in gold satin singing about impossible love and broken hearts and looking wistful.
How deep is your love? Is your love? How deep is your love? I really mean to learn.
When John Travolta strutted through the Bronx in Saturday Night Fever and the Bee Gees' music was married with celluloid, the woman's man was born.
The bit at the beginning where John Travolta is walking down the street with his tight trousers, the shirt unbuttoned, the sort of macho swagger, it just caught that moment and crystallised it.
Their images merged and the Bee Gees and Travolta went global.
It gave them an element of credibility because they were now part of the movie. This is an immaculately clean-cut set of individuals. So this is mass appeal now.
To be a young woman in Leicester and see that on a cinema screen was to be, in a way, exposed to Studio 54 and all that glorious decadence. We were looking for hedonism and some glamour and some excitement that wasn't making us think too hard.
The Bee Gees had been big in the 60s, but on the back of Saturday Night Fever, they went massive, defining pop culture in 1978.
How Deep Is Your Love was #1 before the film came out. But to go from that to 1 million records a week was just unreal. We lost all sense of reality. People climbing over our walls, people driving past and pumping the Fever music outside the gates, and, you know, that kind of craziness.
Saturday Night Fever, the album, is I think, the defining album of the 70s, like Sgt. Pepper was for the 60s.
They got two generations at that point. They got the housewives that were probably with them since the 60s, who now had kids, that thought, that's my band.
The whole world had Saturday Night Fever, but soon this went Saturday Night Light Entertainment.
Grayson's Groovers.
5, 6, 7, 8. It seems that everybody wants to be a John Travolta. The problem is that the film moves just too fast for the devotees to memorise all the steps. So back to school they've come for dancing lessons.
Get your John Travolta finger.
John Travolta finger.
Touch your left elbow with it. Touch. And here we go. It's point and touch and point and touch.
And that, I am told, is what they mean by a beautiful mover.
In early 1978, the Bee Gees owned the charts, and there was no space for anyone else, unless you worked with or were related to them.
Their number ones were gazumped by number ones of other songs that they'd written or produced.
If I can't have you, I don't want nobody, baby.
What's amazing with the Bee Gees, they write songs, we record it, and they'd be great, and then suddenly we say, oh no, it's not good enough, and push it aside. Then Andy would take it and get a hit with it.
The Bee Gees continued riding the crest of the disco wave and hit number 1 again in 1979.
I remember seeing Telly Savalas on television because Kojak was huge. And his comment was, you know, like everything else, this bubble will burst. And I always kept that in my head. You can't have that kind of success without criticism, and it's something we had to learn, and we did.
The backlash against disco was already beginning because it got really bloated and really big really fast, and I think the Bee Gees were kind of seen as the apex of that bloat.
The success of Saturday Night Fever was the final nail in the coffin for disco. Suddenly, disco became the sound of white, straight people.
But tragedy was nothing if not prophetic. The Bee Gees were so big it was painful.
Richard Curtis and I wrote this song, which was sort of a Mickey take of the Bee Gees. I don't think they liked it. I can't think why.
What encapsulates Medallion Man was the cover of Children of the World album. You can almost smell the Aramis coming off the album cover.
They were sort of looking sort of in the middle distance. It looked like they were sort of caught in a wind tunnel. It was quite a sort of macho image, but it was also quite sort of otherworldly.
The teeth and the hair and the medallion and that became uncool really quickly.
Some people have implied that your high voices, coupled with the long hair, shirt open to the navel, revealing hairy chest and medallion look, suggest that you're somewhat less than masculine, and that you...
Look the other way!
Exactly. What do you say to that?
When these comedians try to mock you, it's a compliment in disguise. Very much so. It means that you are a part of the public psyche. You have a valid and important place in it.
At this point where the Bee Gees are seen as impossibly naff, they move behind the scenes. They realise that the brand, for the time being, seems to be sort of irreparably damaged.
In 1980, the Bee Gees parted company with Stigwood. After filing a lawsuit to be released from RSO Records, they retreated to the studio and set a different course.
They then embarked on what became their next phase of their career as songwriters, Guns for Hire.
We needed to show that we were actually songwriters and that Fever was a project, and we were finding all kinds of reasons to make ourselves feel better. And I was so nervous about working with her, I called Neil Diamond and said, what's she like to work with, And he said, oh, relax, she's great. Just go for it, don't worry about it. She's very professional and a very sweet person, so.
At the upper echelons of the best artists, they could access anyone, in fact.
Islands in the stream, that is what we are. No one in between. How can we be wrong? Sail away with me to another world.
These were hit makers And this gave them a new life, a new tension. But the songs are written in the same brotherly way, but they target it for a specific individual. And again, this is a unique quality, one that had been honed over decades.
It just goes to show you that the public image of what the Bee Gees were has no relation to the kind of quality of their music. And if you divorce the music from that, people will still buy it.
After spending 6 years catapulting music's biggest stars back to the top, by 1987 the Bee Gees were ready to relaunch.
The Bee Gees are still going strong, and yes, I do remember them just. Their new album, ESP, is their 25th LP in a recording career that spanned nearly as many years. You Win Again is the 50th single from a songwriting trio whose material has been covered by over 100 different artists.
We'd really been doing this since we were tiny kids, and we were good at it. We always had blinkers on. We never could see what else we would do. And this is all we wanted to do. So I think grim determination and persistence and taking all the blows and taking all the kicks and not worrying about it and just getting on with it. Well, it wasn't this time, but next time, you know? And it's always perceiving that something great was going to happen no matter what.
By the time we get to the 80s, it is a much more mature Bee Gees that we see on stage. They've done it all. There's an audience that has grown up with them now as well, that has stayed with them. It is an older audience. They're not, at that point, attempting to appeal to a younger audience. They just have a fantastic back catalogue.
We were no longer kids. We were no longer something that could really appeal to kids. Money never really was an issue for us. It was really about being famous. The feeling of fame was our big money.
But their main line back to the kids was their songs and the 90s boy bands.
And when you rise in the morning sun, I feel you touch my hand in the pouring rain.
The Bee Gees songs had the perfect ingredients for the boy band, the harmonies and the melancholy. Their longing ballads were perfect for a bit of hormonal adulation.
It's now about business. We want a song that will launch you. We want a song that people will buy into within 30 seconds. We want to cross generations. We want mass appeal. Bee Gees has to be in the mix.
How deep is your love?
You pick the right Bee Gees song, you're going to have a hit.
It's only words, and words are all I have to take your heart away.
And it wasn't just the ballads that put the Bee Gees back on top of the pops.
For Pete Waterman to get Steps to record Tragedy, a whole new generation loved that song. It was a big hit first time for the Bee Gees, but it became an even bigger hit second time. And there's few examples where the cover version is a bigger hit than the original version.
It did nothing for their credibility because, to be honest, I mean, that, you know, forgive me, Steps, but it's a karaoke wedding sing-along version.
The Britpop era is the sort of era where people should have gone, bloody hell, have you heard these early Bee Gees? They should have been sort of hoisted up as an example of kind of classic 60s pop music in a way that all sorts of other things were during the Britpop, Small Faces or whatever. And then it just weren't. They absolutely weren't. And it's because Steps have covered Tragedy and, you know, it's seen as to do with the naffest of naff pop music, which is just sort of desperately unfair, really.
After the years of ridicule, the Bee Gees were still going strong, and they charted yet again in 2001. But it was to be their last hit.
I've seen this story, I read it over once or twice. I said that you say a little bit of bad advice. I've been in trouble, happened to me all my life.
In 2003, Morris died. and the brotherhood was torn asunder.
There's a light, certain kind of light that never shone on me.
Morris dying, that was a real shock to the whole family. And it took a long time for us to get past that.
Live with.
After Morris's death, Barry and Robin rarely performed together. And with Robin's untimely death in 2012, Barry remained alone, the last brother standing.
I have very vivid dreams of my brothers. You know, it's like you actually see your brother and he's talking to you the way he always did. And you wake up and you think, God, that was so real. You know? He wanted to go on stage and I was up for it, and that was the dream. You know?
To love somebody the way I loved you. And it's me you need to show. How deep is your love? Is your love?
The Bee Gees gave us 4 decades of hits. They were so much more than cool.
'Cause we're living in a world of fools.
Songs and melodies that last, that outlast the genres they were written in, like disco or R&B or anything. I mean, they are timeless.
They were masters of melancholy and gave us some of pop's most moving moments.
Just gotta get a message to you. Hold on.
The delivery is so honest and heartbreaking. You have to be a brick wall not to let that affect you.
They were able to connect and speak to you directly in the lyrics on an emotional level. And that is how I began a relationship with the Bee Gees. But at the time, I would never say I was into the Bee Gees because they were not cool.
We would put on tracks by the Bee Gees from Saturday Night Fever just to see what all the cool people would do. Would they be horrified or would they dance? And when I put it on, everyone was horrified. And then they all went crazy because they loved it. It was a guilty pleasure.
I think the Bee Gees have always had secret cred. They've always been one of those bands it's not like cool to be like, yeah, Bee Gees, man, that's my jam. But they have a massive respect.
It's genius. It's proper genius. It's being one of the greatest songwriting teams ever.
And their legacy lives on.
I really can't imagine doing anything else with my life, you know. Some of the greatest moments for me are on a stage, and I still have that hunger. So, but I'll always see my brothers. They'll always be with me. But I still got to do it. I still got to do it.
Not going nowhere.